Again, my name is Mark Pakoff. I am the liaison to our Environmental Advisory Council and Media, and this is our second information session on a plastic bag and straw ban. And our Environmental Advisory Council has put these meetings together. We are talking about this at our borough level, and we wanted to bring in some people throughout Delaware County to talk about some of these ideas and get thoughts on the processes involved. I'll start off with our welcome, our introductions and acknowledgments. Then we'll have some guest speakers, and I'll turn it over to Erica Berman, who is really the driving force behind this whole process and this effort. She is on a subcommittee of our Zero Waste Committee within the Environmental Advisory Council with Karen Tossig-Lux, as well as Adeline Cianella, and they have been working tirelessly to put this together. There was an earlier session, and this session has really brought people in from all over Delaware County. We have three guest speakers this evening who will all speak for about 5 to 8 minutes. Farron Savitz of Penn Environment, Logan Weldy of the Clean Air Council, and Will Williams, the Sustainability Director for Westchester Borough. After each of their presentations, there will be an opportunity for questions and answers. I would ask if you have questions for any of the specific participants that you put them in the chat box. That way we'll be able to collect them together. We'll also save the chat. If anybody would like to put their contact information, if you're interested in more information as we go through the evening, we will save the chat and we'll get back to you on any of the questions that you do raise. That way we won't miss anything. If we happen to not get to it tonight, we will follow up and get back to you. At the very end, we'd like updates from the various municipalities that are with us tonight. I want to, again, give a special congratulations to Erica for her outreach. Look at these communities that are here tonight: Easttown, Haverford, Lansdowne, Media, Nether Providence, Newtown. We have Francine Locke, the Sustainability Officer for Delaware County, Parkside, Philly, Radnor, Swarthmore, Thornbury, Tredyffrin, Upper Darby, Upper Providence, Westchester Borough. Just a remarkable turnout, and thank you all for being here this evening. So I'm going to now turn things over to Erica Berman, who is going to be introducing our guests. I guess I'll introduce the guests, and then Erica will ask them questions, and they'll each have time to present. Our first visitor is Farron Savitz of Penn Environment. Farron is the zero waste and conservation advocate with Penn Environment. He's been a part of successful campaigns to pass a plastic bag ban in Philadelphia, to eliminate the state's preemption on plastic bag ordinances, and published research testing Pennsylvania waterways for microplastic pollution. For each of our guests, I would ask you just to briefly, at the top of your comments, introduce your organization, tell us a little bit about it and its mission, and then we're looking forward to your presentations. So without further ado, I'll turn things over to Erica and Farron.
Sure. Thanks, Mark. I think this has been the product of some great collaborations, so I'm glad that we're all here to learn more. And with that, I will pass it off to Farron. Can you unmute yourself, Farron? No, you cannot. All right, let me make you host.
Awesome. Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I know I've met a lot of you before, but my name's Farron. I'm the zero waste advocate with Penn Environment. If you're not familiar with us, we're a statewide environmental grassroots nonprofit. We sort of believe that every Pennsylvanian has a right to clean air to breathe, clean water to drink, and a safe and healthy environment. Thank you again to Erica and Karen and the rest of media for organizing this meeting, bringing everyone together, and inviting me back to talk with you guys. I don't want to talk for too long, but I do want to address a few things: why plastic pollution is an issue for local communities, why ordinances are important and timely, and then give some updates on what's happening across the state. So with this group, I don't want to go too deep into why single-use plastics are a problem. I think most people here agree they are, but there are a few compelling parts of the issue around single-use plastics that don't get talked about enough. And the first is the link between plastics and climate change. Because a lot of times I hear that you have to either prioritize fighting climate change or fighting plastic pollution, but they're not mutually exclusive. They're both super linked together. Plastic comes from somewhere, and that somewhere is fossil fuels. Traditionally, that's been petroleum, but in recent years, natural gas has become a leading source of new plastic products. And that's natural gas fracked right here in Pennsylvania. We're extracting so much natural gas here that we're outstripping the demand for heating and power. And so we're turning it into plastic. And companies are pushing more and more single-use plastic because if we use more plastic, there's more gas that can be extracted and they can make more profits. And that causes problems for a bunch of parts of our system because if fracked gas is so cheap that it makes new plastic super cheap, recycled plastic is now never going to be a viable option. So there's nowhere to send plastic once it's been recycled. And so that whole system of dealing with plastic products, once we've used them and turned them into waste, kind of falls apart around us. But if we take actions like banning single-use plastics, we reduce the demand for natural gas, we reduce new fracking wells, the pipelines that run through our backyards, we can reduce a major source of emissions, and we can foster markets for recyclable materials. Plastics also affect climate change in a few other ways. Beyond extraction, there's a transportation cost of getting gas to factories to turn it into plastic. There's a transportation of getting plastic to retailers. There's the cost of cracking ethane into material that can be turned into plastic. There's the emission costs of landfills and incinerators and our whole waste system. And in fact, there are some new studies showing that by 2030, less than a decade from now, the emissions from plastic will be greater than the emissions from coal, which is mind-boggling, especially since we have so many cleaner, greener alternatives, single-use plastics, and simple policies that will help us reduce our footprint in that way. As far as the local angle and why this should be a concern for municipalities specifically, plastics, especially plastic bags, are incredibly difficult to recycle. In fact, most locally available recycling can't handle plastic bags, but bags get put in recycling bins anyway. They can clog recycling machinery, add thousands of hours of work time, raise the cost of recycling substantially, and oftentimes municipalities bear the brunt of those costs. They also have to deal with the cost of litter and illegal dumping. They deal with complaints from residents and the added challenge of dealing with stormwater, since plastic bags clog stormwater infrastructure. And that greatly increases the damages from flooding, it increases the damages from heavy rainfall, and we're seeing more and more of that right now. So around the state, the cost of dealing with litter and illegal dumping without even factoring in stormwater and recycling is in the tens of millions. A study by Keep Pennsylvania Beautiful found that 9 of Pennsylvania's biggest cities spend close to $70 million every year just on litter and illegal dumping. And that's only 9 cities. We have thousands of municipalities across the state. So the cost is just staggering of dealing with plastic. And there's a temptation to say, well, maybe we don't have litter, or our residents are good at throwing away our plastic, or we have a good job of dealing with it. So is plastic pollution really that big of an issue? But the problem with plastic is that there is no away. In a landfill, in an incinerator, in our environment, plastic is just not going to break down into organic components like paper or food waste does. Instead, it turns into these tiny pieces of plastic called microplastics, and they're everywhere. They're in our air, our food, our water. They're so common that studies suggest every week we ingest 5 grams of plastic, or about the weight of a plastic bag, every week, just from living our daily lives. We at Penn Environment did a study testing 53 rivers, lakes, and streams for microplastics. We released this last March, and that included the Delaware, the Schuylkill, Darby Creek, Crum Creek, Ridley Creek, and a bunch of others. And we found microplastics in every single waterway that we tested. Over 300 samples were collected, and almost all of them had microplastics in them. And at least one sample from every waterway had plastic pollution. It really didn't matter if there was litter, if there was a clean and pristine waterway, plastic was everywhere. And that's partly why it's so important for us to tackle this at a local level, because this is where we're getting our drinking water from. It's where we fish, it's where kids play. And so it's really an intensely local issue, because this is a problem for everyone, everywhere, even beyond the scope of litter. And if that doesn't motivate you to act soon on plastic pollution, the political situation in Pennsylvania might do that. As many of you know, up until last December, there was a preemption on local plastic bans, a ban on bans, if you will. It was initially introduced as a standalone bill that got vetoed by the governor, but then it got reintroduced as part of the budget. And that was in effect until last December. Multiple municipalities, along with Penn Environment, Clean Air Council, sued the legislature, and that helped get it to end. However, we know it could come back either in the future as part of the budget, or depending on who wins the governor's race in November, as a standalone bill. So the best way to stop this preemption from coming back and taking away the right to pass these ordinances is to have communities start introducing and passing their own bills. Because if municipalities use the power that they have given to them, it's harder for the legislature to then take it away. So there's a bit of a window right now to move it or lose it. And there is action around the state. Notably, Philadelphia began implementing their ordinance in the fall. Narvik started re-implementing theirs after a pandemic pause last month. Pittsburgh introduced a ban fee hybrid bill in November. It got reintroduced in January with their new council session, so it should come up for a vote pretty soon. West Goshen passed a ban over the holidays that's going to go into effect in April, and they have a great set of resources on their website. So I highly recommend checking it out if you're looking for good signs or FAQs, or a good example for other municipalities. Ambler Borough voted on an ordinance last week. They voted on one that was a few years old. It wasn't the best environmental policy, so it ended up getting tabled. I'm working with them now to clean it up, but they should have a good ordinance introduced and up for a vote pretty soon. A set of EACs in Montgomery County have been working together on developing their own ordinances. Logan, Jim, and I all met with them last week, and it was kind of similar to this meeting actually, but a lot of them are in the process of surveying their retailers and residents, developing their own ordinances, and some of them will probably introduce soon. Lower Merion, a neighbor to a bunch of Delco municipalities, are probably going to introduce an ordinance within the next month or two. They're probably the furthest along of that set of municipalities. One thing I will say coming out of that meeting, there's a tendency to want to wait for our neighbors to take action before we move forward ourselves. And there's something to be said for wanting to act as a block. You have a sort of cover in that way, but I'll caution against that by saying momentum is powerful. If everyone is waiting for the other person to get ready to act, if we're waiting for everyone else to take that first step, we're gonna miss this window of opportunity that we have. Philly, Narberth, Westchester, West Goshen all have plastic bag bans. Shoppers and retailers know this is where things are going. They know policies are coming. They know how to adjust to them. So we just need communities to take the lead, get out in front, and pass their own bans, because elected officials will, if they see the wave coming and that momentum, will take action themselves. And it'll make it easier to get the ball rolling and create a snowball effect of more and more ordinances getting passed. And that probably ran a bit over time, but I'll pass it along to the next person, I guess.
Thank you, Farron. We do have a couple of questions, Erica, that I think did you see them in the chat?
Yeah, I did. I guess we can address some of the questions that are pertinent to what just was presented now, and then
Sure,
save till the end.
We can save them till the end if you want.
Yeah, maybe we'll just do that.
Okay,
but
that's
Farron,
fine.
thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We'll move on to our next guest then, and let me share my screen with everyone. And our next guest, oh, where is it? Are you seeing it? Just a moment. I don't know what happened to that. I'm going to stop sharing. For our next guest, let me just call that up. Something happened with my screen sharing capability, I believe. Hang on a moment. I do apologize for this. There we go. Okay. All right. So our next guest is Logan Weldy, who is with the Clean Air Council. And give me one moment. He is a staff attorney and the legislative director with the Clean Air Council. At the council, Logan has focused on plastic and other single-use products and has worked to reduce the use of these types of products. Have we given Logan the opportunity to unmute, made him a host?
Did not.
Okay.
Sorry, Logan, hold on. It's not because we don't love you.
So he will be with us momentarily, and I will...
Thank you so much.
Feature him.
Okay, I can speak
Yeah, great.
Hi everyone. I know some of you, and for those of you that I don't know, it's nice to meet you. And Mark, you pronounced my last name correctly, which is a first. I always get Weld, and so
that was really important to me.
Yeah, thanks. Logan Weldy, pronouns are he, him, and I am a staff attorney and legislative director at Clean Air Council. I've been there since 2000, well, about 2010. I was interning when I was in law school. And I actually went to law school because I was living in New York City, and just the tremendous amount of plastic waste was so overwhelming to me. I was working at Marvel Comics, and I was in charge of importing the toys, and I was just dumbfounded at how much plastic we needed to use for our everything, and most of it in China got dumped into the waters. So it was depressing, and I realized that I really wanted to do something for my career that would be positive for the environment and for our planet and animals and people. So I decided to go to law school at Temple, and then I went to Clean Air Council, which really was a perfect fit for me. I started working on the plastic bill immediately, and for about 8.5 years worked with Councilman Squilla to get it passed in Philadelphia. And the week he introduced this most recent bill, the state legislature preempted it. So we wound up I was the attorney for the council who sued, as Farah mentioned, along with some of the municipalities, and we were successful. Well, we were successful in that we got the state legislature to not put the preemption again in the fiscal code. So as Farah mentioned, if we get an R in the governor's seat, we probably will get a lot more preemptions. I do a lot of preemption work for the council, and I do foresee that being one of them. And there's a few other bad bills out there also. Farron did hit on almost everything, and as he always does, he did a great job. I will just dive a little, and definitely I want to leave a lot of time for questions, so I won't talk too much longer than this. But first of all, this is a business-friendly bill, and that's one thing that I really try to push to people all of the time. And when I meet with Philadelphia City Council members or other legislators, I say, listen, I'm not going to propose any legislation or advocate for legislation that doesn't also help the economics of your community and the environment of your community. Imagine if you could go to a business and say to the business, hey, we're going to just get rid of one of your costs. We're going to get rid of a headache that you have to deal with every month. So they would probably say, great. And to the businesses, bags are a hassle. They're a cost. They're something that they've got to order. They've got to store them. They've got to distribute them. And they don't get money back for those bags. They do cost them the business money. And there's this huge misconception, and I'm sure none of you fall into this trap, but a lot of people just believe the bags are free, and they are absolutely not free. They have a tremendous cost, not only to the environment, but to communities and to business owners, to customers and taxpayers. Farron hit on some of those already, but from the production of the bags all the way through to the point of people littering the bags, or even putting them into the landfills or recycling, which a lot of people wind up doing, it costs all along that stream of use. I calculated Philadelphia's cost was about, so for a customer and a taxpayer, it would cost each person about $20 to $30 a year. And that's in the millions of dollars for the 1.5 million residents. And then the municipality, it costs about $12 million a year for Philadelphia. And that might be I tried to err on the conservative side. So I believe that the costs are probably a bit higher than that. I grew up in Haverford, and my mom still lives there. I know the areas around there are relatively clean, but as Farron pointed out, They're in our waters. They're in our bodies. You know, you just can't escape the costs and the environmental damage of plastic. So I also want to point out that paper has an environmental cost as well. So I know we're talking about plastic tonight, but I don't want you to forget the point of this legislation isn't to push people's behavior into getting paper bags. It's to push people to bring their own bag or not use a bag. Paper bags have a tremendous cost also. Paper and plastic bags there's 2 life cycles, pre-checkout and post-checkout. Pre-checkout, paper has a tremendous environmental cost and maybe higher than plastic. Farron pointed out the plastic does come from, most of it, 99%, I believe now, is coming from fracked gas. So it does have a tremendous cost, but paper does also. So we don't want to change people's behaviors, and business costs would just skyrocket. In Philadelphia, we calculated the business costs would go from about $32 million a year if they're using mostly plastic to about $100 million a year if they're using all paper. So, it's not a good piece of legislation if you're just going to put a fee or ban plastic. You should ban plastic and put a fee on paper, and we can get into more of that later tonight. I would also not suggest doing any carve-outs for low income or any of those delivery or anything. Just do a really simple bill. Ban plastic and put a fee on paper for everything. No carve-outs, no exceptions. It's just so confusing when you start to add exceptions and carve-outs in these bills. And it's just an unnecessary headache for everyone, legislators, enforcers, and the businesses and customers and consumers. That's about all I just wanted to hit on. And I'll be here the whole time for questions. I think it's really nice to get a lot of questions from you all. So I'll end my part now.
Great, thank you so much. That was very informative. I appreciate it. And I'm going to now introduce our final speaker of the evening, and that is there's Ordinance Resources. Is somebody else sharing?
That's
me.
Oh, okay. Oh, I'm sorry. That's Walter sharing. Okay.
You want to just read his?
Yeah, I'll just hang on. I'll just read it. That's fine. Walt Williams joins us from Westchester Borough, and give me 1 second to call this up here. Will Williams was hired as the borough's first sustainability director in 2019. He works on energy, environmental, and stormwater issues on behalf of the residents and businesses and the Westchester Borough Council. Will worked on the passage of Westchester's single-use waste ordinance in 2019, educating the community and businesses in 2020 and 2021. He is now responsible for enforcement in 2022. He is a longtime resident of Westchester Borough. Thank you so much for being with us tonight, and you may take it away.
All right. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, everyone, for having me. I'll just jump right into my slides in the interest of time here. A little bit of background about how we got to where we are today. We were originally petitioned on this issue by a group of students. I think that was 2018. It predates my time at the borough, either 2017 or 2018. So that's tip number 1. If you want to get this done in your community, have a bunch of cute kids come to a public meeting and shame the adults. That's a really good way to start. Dead serious about that. Our ordinance was approved in summer of 2019. And that was after the first exemption, the delay by the original state budget or whatever. So we approved the ordinance anyway. The preemption said you couldn't approve ordinance. We approved it anyway, but we set an effective date the day after the preemption expired, sort of a little middle finger to the folks in Harrisburg. And then obviously COVID hit and everything. And you know what, full disclosure, even if we were allowed to, we would have let 2020 for sure and probably 2021 play out before imposing anything new on our business community. Just, so much going on, a lot of businesses fighting for their lives. Not really a good time. I mean, I get it. There's never like a good time to start anything, and we can't really wait on this, but that's just the truth of the COVID years. But as many of you know, the emergency declaration and the COVID preemption ended in June. Borough Council picked it up immediately, set an enforcement date a few weeks after we were allowed, just pushed it to January 1st, 2022. So as of 5 weeks ago, we were ready to go, and enforcement began. So I want to point everyone to this. Our ordinance, which I'll get into shortly, is a ban on plastic and a fee on paper. I think it's the toughest law in the state. I'm very proud of that. But you go to this website here, you can download the ordinance, change Borough of Westchester to your community, and take it to your elected folks at their next meeting. There's a 2-page info sheet, which is sort of the plain language version of the ordinance. Ordinances are very dense. They need to be. There's good reasons that they're dense, but they're dense. So we sort of translated it into plain English in 2 pages. There's an FAQ document, which we're continually updating as we get, basically, if we get the same question twice, we add it to the FAQ. And there's an exemption request form there. You'll see we do have an exemption request process, although so far that really hasn't been that critical. So here's our ordinance in detail. Section 81.3, no plastic bags. And we exempted like raw meat and fish, but that's not really like, that stuff tends to already be packaged. You're not really like taking raw fish up to the counter and checking out in a grocery store. So, but we picked that up from another ordinance, and it made sense to include. 81.4, no plastic straws. Exemption for people who cannot drink without a straw. There's no reason that a plastic straw is easier to drink out of than any other material for someone with a disability. We just didn't want to get into like making rules in that scenario. So we just included that. It's a pretty common exemption. And then section 81.5 is a 10-cent fee for a compliant bag. Compliant bag must be 40% recycled paper content and either recyclable or compostable. All paper is compostable. So people see that definition and they think it's like very technical, but you're basically limited to a recycled paper bag. You got to charge 10 cents for it, and you're supposed to disclose it on the sales receipt. And the fee does not apply to food delivery, never did. And takeout, we're amending our ordinance to exempt takeout food. I can talk a little bit about that. Enforcement, so what happens, and this is what I've been working on the last few weeks, only have had to take the first step with a few businesses, but first they basically get a strongly worded letter from the borough that says, hey, you're not complying with our ordinance. Here's all the information you need to comply. Here's a date you need to be compliant by, or we'll be back. And if we come back and you're not in compliance, first fine is $100, then $200, then $500, and then from there it escalates very quickly. So I really hope we don't have to get there. I think there's going to be 1 or 2 businesses that, for frankly political reasons of the owner, to try to throw us a middle finger on this, and that'll get very expensive really quickly. Technically, we can cite every straw could be a $500 citation. So we'll never get to this point, but we could go into a bar Saturday night and hand out tens of thousands of dollars in fines. Really don't want to get there, but the way it's written, we could do that if we needed to. Exemptions can be applied for. It's a 1-year, not a permanent exemption. They go to our resident volunteer committee for approval, basically, and you need to meet 2 criteria. The hardship has to be unique to your business, and it has to be an undue hardship. Sort of subjective. That's why we have a public committee review these instead of me at my desk deciding the merit of these cases. We had one which was someone who sells memorabilia, and they go in little plastic sleeves, like signed posters and stuff, and they go in like plastic sleeves. We decided that didn't meet the definition of a plastic bag in our ordinance, so it was an irrelevant question. We got one from a place that sells smoothies. They said they haven't been able to find a product that works with smoothies. That's not a unique thing to that business. There are a ton of places in Westchester that sell smoothies. So they were denied their exemption because of that. So common questions we get: what happens to this 10-cent fee? It goes to the business. That's to offset the cost of the paper bag, but really to discourage people from using a bag if they don't need one. I got a watch battery the other day at a drugstore, and I was offered a bag for, those like little button batteries. They tried to give me a bag for that. That's why there's a fee. Fees have been shown to reduce single-use bags of any usage by about 50%. So without the fee, you're taking your plastic bags, you're turning them into paper bags. You're not reducing your use at all. And as Logan said, paper bags have their own consequences. Businesses ask, do we have to charge a fee? Yes, although again, except for delivery and soon enough takeout. Compliant bag, I already mentioned. And then we get a lot of questions about plant-based plastics. We get a lot of businesses who say, oh, this doesn't apply to me. My plastic bags are made from cornstarch plastic. It's probably better on the front end environmentally, but that end of life is just as bad as a plastic bag that's made of fossil fuels. It can't be recycled unless you go to like a special facility. If you put it in the trash, it's going to be in the landfill for 1,000,000 years. So no, plant-based plastics are not exempted from this policy. I will get a ton of questions about the fee, but it's a policy nudge. The purpose is to push us to the truly sustainable behavior, which is not using single-use crap. Or, if you need to bring a bag, you bring your own. It prevents plastic from becoming paper. It covers the added cost. I mentioned that already. This is really important too. It shifts the cost of the bags to the user instead of all of us. Right now, in a community that doesn't have a bag fee, we all pay for the bags. They're baked into the cost of every transaction. If you have a fee, then only people who use the bags are paying for the fee. And, hypothetically, costs should come down that way. At least they're being shifted to the users of this resource that has negative sort of societal impacts. It lowers the municipal costs. Doesn't make a huge difference in Westchester, but in a community like Philadelphia, we pay $72 at the landfill, and we have recycling costs. We don't pay for recycling, but there are costs associated with recycling anything. So if all you're doing is shifting to paper and all those paper bags magically end up in the recycling, which we know that they will not, there are still costs to that. We want to get rid of the single-use stuff. This is the ban plus the fee is a second generation bag policy. First generation is just the ban alone. So if you're considering this, if your politicians have the stones to do it, go for a second generation policy. First generation, honestly, in my opinion, is virtue signaling. Very little more than that. And then again, takeout and delivery is exempted. So what to expect if you're able to get an ordinance in place? Education is absolutely critical. We did multiple in-person points of contact to every single business in our borough. Still going back now that we're enforcing, and people tell me, I've never heard of this. So cannot emphasize that enough. For a big community, I don't know how you tackle that, but you need boots on the ground. You're going to have way less than 100% compliance to start. If I had to guess, I would say we're probably in the range of 50 to 60%. Businesses, industry groups, and lobbyists will undermine your efforts before, during, and after the process. We had like lobbying groups come out of the woodwork and come to little old Westchester Borough and try to derail us. We have a downtown business improvement district, like friendly, neighborhood business improvement district. They sent out an email to their business list after our ordinance has passed and said, hey, if you hate the idea of this, come to a public meeting and complain to the politicians. So that takes me down to my second to last bullet there is, after the ordinance passes, all the cute kids go away and you never see them again. And all your supporters go silent. All you get is 100% negative feedback from pissed off customers and restaurants and shops. You got to be prepared for that. You need politicians with backbone. You need, really data-driven policy to fall back on, because like I said, once the rubber hits the road, it's 100% negative feedback. No one goes to a store, figures out they have to pay 10 cents for a bag and they say, oh, great, I'm going to email my local politician and tell them I'm so happy about this. That doesn't exist. So you got to be ready for that. What we're also learning is enforcement mechanism and responsibility needs to be spelled out in the ordinance. We know responsibility, that's my role, but the mechanism was written very softly because I think we were hoping everyone would comply right away. But we're going to have to write letters and probably eventually tickets. And our ordinance is a little vague on that. So I wouldn't be surprised if we have to amend that. Right now, we can do it, but it's a ton of paperwork. So we want to get this so it's something like as easy as writing a parking ticket, which we do 50 times an hour in the town of Westchester. And then lastly, politicians change. I mentioned a couple of times the importance of your politicians backing this. That's great if you can get a receptive council or board of supervisors, whatever. But fast forward 2 or 3 years, and they're all gone. So your incoming politicians have to be on board as well. Or when all that negative feedback shows up, and it will, then you're going to have questions. And we faced this in December. We had a very concerted effort to really destroy the whole ordinance. And if they had tried that this month, we have 3 of our 7 politicians are new. We have a new mayor, that's 4. They might have been successful. So, that's also something to be aware of. So again, if you have questions, curious about what we're doing and how we did it, go to this website and there's a lot of good information there. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Walt. I appreciate it. And I think we'll turn things over to Erica. And Erica, have you been monitoring the questions and do you want to have conversation and present them to everyone?
Yeah, sure thing. I'm going to ask Will to exit the sharing screen. Okay, perfect. Thank you, Will. Thank you, all of our speakers. I appreciate you taking the time to come out and to educate us. Like Mark said in the beginning, this kind of stemmed from media EAC looking at adopting or presenting a bag and straw ban. And in doing so, we started to hear from other municipalities that were either further along or interested in looking into this. So this is a way for us to share resources. So I'm grateful that we're all here and we can hear from all these different groups. We were hoping to have a business that has adopted a bag ban on tonight. But unfortunately, the business we were talking to in Narvik couldn't attend in person. But Addie spoke with Drew, who owns the Greeks for over 26 years, which is a pub and restaurant in Narvik. Narvik implemented so I just wanted to share before we go into the quick Q&A, just some notes from that since he can't be here. But Narvik did implement their bag and straw ordinance in 2018, which was the first in Pennsylvania. I think at that time it was difficult to find consistent suppliers, specifically for plastic straws, but that has improved tremendously over the years. And they thought it was really useful that Narvik encouraged owners to follow the ordinance through flyers, emails, and word of mouth. And they're a small borough, so there is no formal enforcement or honor system. For enforcement, it is based on an honor system. And it seems like most customers are aware of the ban and appreciative and understanding of where they're coming from. So I just wanted to share some of that feedback. Some of the first question we did receive, ban versus fee. Why is the fee such an important component of the ordinance, which I think we touched on, but maybe we could just reiterate. Another thing that ties in with that is Radnor has proposed an ordinance that's going to charge for giving out a plastic bag rather than outright banning them. And what do you think of this? So it's a 2-part question. Bag fee, why is it important? And what are your thoughts on someone charging for a bag ban, charging for a plastic bag? I guess I'll throw this to Farron.
Sure, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's been touched on already, but the best model is that ban fee hybrid. And the ban applies to plastic because it's the worst environmental option. It can't be recycled. There's no sustainable way of dealing with it. But as both Will and Logan mentioned, paper has its own footprint, reusable bags have a footprint, other types of bags have footprint. So you want to reduce overall bag usage, and fees, even a small fee, we recommend a minimum of 10 cents, but ideally closer to 15, is effective at getting people to remember their own reusable bag. Because if you have that cost, you think, okay, I won't use 3 paper bags, I'll just use 1. Or I'll make sure I have reusable bags in a backpack or in my car or by my door when I leave the house. That way, you always have one and you always remember it. It's also good for retailers because it helps them cover the cost of switching from plastic to more expensive alternatives, because plastic is the cheapest option. It's cheap to make plastic. Expensive for our environment, but cheap for businesses. So the fee helps cover that cost. And then it also helps a bit with enforcement, because if a business is getting money by charging for bags, each bag that they use, they're more likely to self-enforce it because they're benefiting from it. So it not only makes retailers more friendly to the policy, but it makes enforcement that bit easier. And I'll put a link in the chat, but we developed a model ordinance based on best practices we saw not just in Pennsylvania with Narvik, Westchester, and Philly, but also across the country of what's worked elsewhere, what hasn't worked. And we sort of made a massive ordinance with all the best practices you can use. So I'll put a link to that in the chat, which feel free to take a look at it.
And I agree with everything that Farron said. I will add, there are municipalities that have tried just to do like a ban of plastic and then switch to paper without any fee. And it was just catastrophe. It didn't, Chicago was the most notable one. It just didn't work. And so they amended the legislation to add a fee. One of the, when someone needs to pay for something, and Will kind of touched on this, when someone needs to pay for something, they actually have to stop and think about it. So when it's called a Pigouvian tax and a Pigouvian fee. So you're breaking out the external cost of an item and you're telling someone actually what it costs. Every action, every item that we do or buy or take does have a cost in one way or another. And so we're highlighting that to people, and we're expressing that the society has determined that there is a cost for this. So it's just, without a fee, it's pretty much a worthless piece of legislation. The enforcement's not going to be very easy to do. As Farron mentioned, the self-enforcement happens a lot with a fee. You're also putting businesses in a really difficult position. So think about it this way. If you ban plastic with no fee on paper, you're forcing them to buy something that's much more expensive with the expectation that their customers are going to want that for free. And I'll always put quotes around that. But the bags are baked into the cost of goods sold, just like the lights are, the staff, everything, the rent. There's no free bag. It's just the businesses will then have to pay for more, and customers will be upset. Some stores might not be able to afford the switch to paper, and will have to charge, and customers will become enraged at that, and that business will really suffer the consequences. So it's a disservice to businesses. It's a disservice to the customers and the communities. A fee is just plainly the way to go. A 10-cent fee is the minimum that Clean Air Council also suggests, as Farron mentioned. You're going to get, with a 10-cent fee, about a 75% reduction. All the way up to a 25-cent fee gets you about a 95% reduction. Ireland was where most of those numbers came from, because Ireland, among many others, started with a lower fee and then escalated the fee to get higher and higher reductions. It just makes sense. As an item is more expensive and that item's worth is not correlated to the cost, then people are going to use less of it. A bag, someone who's getting one item does not need, like the watch battery, you do not need a bag for a watch battery, and you especially do not need a 25-cent bag for a watch battery. So the fee is where it's at. Without a fee, you are enacting bad legislation.
Thank you. Appreciate you clarifying that. It's a big hot button question. Another one is, how do you recommend enforcement in small communities? I'm gonna pitch that one to Will, if you're willing.
Yeah, so I saw that in the chat too, and I should have been more specific about the way we're responding. We're not going out and staking out restaurants and stores. I don't have time to do that. It's really complaint driven, which has happened. I've only gotten one really weird phone call that made me uncomfortable, which I'm pretty sure was someone ratting out their competitor. But you know, I get emails. I openly solicit people to tell me, and you know, even though our enforcement in the ordinance starts with you get a letter, even before that, we're going out. I'm going out and talking to the owner, talking to the manager, and just making sure that we're all on the same page. That would be the third in-person visit that we've done at each establishment. And, you know, Super Friendly just says, hey, we got word that you guys are not compliant with our ordinance. Here's everything you need to do to be compliant, but we're not putting it in writing. Then we need to come back before we put it in writing. And that's really just sort of, you know, trying to make it as business friendly as possible. A couple people mentioned supply chain issues. It's really hard getting any standard thing right now. A lot of people, and for good reason, thought there was going to be another exemption. They thought we were going to kick the can down the road. So they might add inventory. I think the worst outcome for a plastic bag, you know, that's sitting in a box and the inventory is they take that box and throw it in the dumpster. Like, you know, at least let's have like someone use the product before it goes, you know, in the trash. So, but yeah, I mean, there's no way that any municipality of any size or any complexity is going to have proactive people out there like checking in. So I think complaint driven is a good way to do it. And if people understand like, hey, because you complain, that doesn't mean we're going to go out and write someone a $500 fine. They feel pretty good about it. It's more about let's get everyone in compliance rather than cite people for non-compliance. So yeah, I think the public plays a really important role there.
Awesome. Thank you. And I guess I'm going to toss this back to you, Will, but what do you think was most, and maybe Farron can talk about Philadelphia, like what do you both think was most effective when communicating with businesses and customers? What was the most effective method of communicating when the ordinance is going to go into effect?
Yeah, it's in person. The most time consuming, the most expensive, you know, if you think about staff costs and everything. It doesn't need to be staff though. It can be volunteers or, you know, whatever. But we learned that mail doesn't work. Emails doesn't work. You have to go in, you have to talk to the owner, you have to talk to the manager. Even then, you know, I was given that, I was saying that we've been places multiple times and they tell us they haven't heard of it. That could be the manager. I mean, there's that industry, you know, restaurant managers, they turn over like crazy. Everything's been turning over like crazy staffing wise the last, you know, 6 months or whatever. So it is possible that that specific manager had never heard of it. So, you know, you're up against staffing challenges. It really, all other mediums are ineffective. You have to go in, you have to knock on doors, you have to put stuff under the door in the mailbox and talk to people.
Thank you. Farron, do you want to add anything that was effective from Philly? Or Logan, sorry, I didn't see you.
Well, I'll just quickly say, I racked my brain when Squilla and I were first working on the legislation, because I knew Philly was not going to do a good job of getting the word out. The press you're going to get is helpful in the beginning, but that, you know, goes away after a little while and people do forget, especially if it takes a while to pass legislation. So in Philly, I wrote in a provision that required businesses to put a sign at the point of checkout, and that sign alerted people to the date that bags would no longer be allowed to be given out, and just a little bit about the law. So there was a provision in there, and it required businesses to put a sign at checkout. And I thought, you know, for Philly, I think that's a good way to do it. And I think for other municipalities also, But you are going to get a little bit of press on it, and then forcing the businesses to make the announcement somewhere at the point of checkout, I think, is the best way to do it.
Yeah, we bake a signage period. So businesses have 30 days to put up signs about about the incoming ordinance. And then there's time between when the signs go up and when they have to actually stop using plastic bags. That gives them time to adjust, it gives consumers time to adjust, and it creates this adjustment period. And during that time, you can do a ton of other outreach. You should definitely put up information on the township website, on your EAC website, if you have a dedicated EAC website. West Goshen did a good job of putting up sample signs and information on timeline, FAQ. Philly has a good site, though I'm not sure if they've done a great job publicizing it to retailers. But that's another way of just getting the word out, because if you have a place where people can look, it's especially useful to bring them that information. But also phone calls, emails, going in person to businesses, and just trying to spread the word any way you can. Social media is another good option. And then partner with local groups in the area. If you have vibrant community groups, if you have watershed organizations, they have lists of people that they can send the information out to, making sure not just retailers know, but residents too. Because if residents know about the ordinance, they can share the information with retailers they visit frequently. Church groups or recreation groups are another great resource. Just trying to get it out into the community in any way possible, and making sure that you're getting all that information out there so as many people know as possible.
Great, thank you. Another question is, if our township municipality passes an ordinance now, is it enforceable if another ban on bans is passed in the future, which meaning preemption? I'll pass this to Logan. Or Farron, whoever wants it. Logan, you're muted.
Yeah, it would be dependent upon the language. So preemption on bags has been attempted about 5 times in Pennsylvania. Through 3 of them were through single subject legislation, which all failed. 2 of them were through the fiscal code. I imagine that they will not try again to do the fiscal code. I believe, as Farron said earlier, if we lose, well, and I did too, if we lose the governor, we probably will see a preemption, and that preemption could preempt enactment or enforcement of legislation. So yes, it's possible that your enforcement mechanism would go away, but I can tell you, we'll sue. Clean Air Council, and I assume Penn Environment will probably be in court as soon as that law is passed. So I think you have not only the right, but the duty as legislators and as stewards of your community's environment to pass these types of legislation that protect your environment under the Pennsylvania State Constitution, Article 1, Section 27. So I think you're well protected if that's the case. So the answer is yes, it's possible. And if they do it with enforcement, you could be preempted, but you do have recourse. And I should say, and Farron mentioned this earlier, it's nice to have a lot of people passing this. And, you know, we got to, it's Farron, I think this is, we've been on multiple ones of these. It seems like everyone's like, all right, let's do it, but we're waiting for other people. I don't think there's as much time to wait. I think just do it. And you guys get this legislation out there, because once many municipalities in Pennsylvania have this, they're going to kind of look like fools if they start trying to get preemption out there again. So it's going to be much more difficult if there are hundreds of horses out of the barn versus 1 or 2. So I guess my basic ask here is just get the legislation out there. So.
Thank you. Aaron, did you want to add anything to that?
I guess the only thing to add is I'm hearing similar stuff on the urgency from members of the legislature. People who have tried to stop preemption before, but have been unsuccessful, are pretty open that the more local communities that are actually making use of this authority and actually passing things, the more difficult it is for their colleagues to pass new preemptions. So this isn't just us saying it, it's coming from our state representatives too.
Thank you. Okay, this is really quick. What about dry cleaners? Will, I don't know, how are you dealing with that?
Yeah, it's a good question. It comes up, but yeah, I went back to the ordinance recently, and dry cleaning plastic does not fit the definition of a single-use plastic bag. Probably should, but it doesn't the way the ordinance is written, so the ordinance doesn't apply to them. We only have, I think we only have 2 dry cleaners, and one of them started selling reusable garment bags, and occasionally they're asking, not always, but they're asking people, they have a sign about the borough's law, and I was up there recently, and the customer in front of me asked them to take the plastic off their dry cleaning, but only if they could reuse it. So I think, yeah, they're not subject to our ordinance, but they seem to have like heard us and what we're trying to accomplish, and they're trying to do their part, which is really cool to see.
That's great.
I would say Philadelphia, we had it in the legislation for years, and the one that passed, it is exempted. So there is no ban on dry cleaning plastic bags in Philadelphia, although we did have it in originally and wanted it to be in there. So I would support it. I think we've got to move away from plastic. And if it's not going to impact too many businesses, maybe you could just go speak with them and see if they'd be able to work with you on it. So
thank you. I want to lift up a question that was put in the chat. Are we expecting a Delaware County to implement a countywide ban? And Francine did put an answer in the chat, but I'd like you to, if you're available, to come off mute, Francine, and maybe just, give that update that you put in the chat, if you don't mind.
Sure. Hi. Yeah, sure. First, you can hear me okay?
Good.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much for this session. It's so informative and amazing. And it's sort of a no-brainer. We need to do this. Everyone needs to do this. It's a simple thing that every municipality can do. Delaware County should do it. And my response in the chat is that we need to get a county council member's support of this ordinance. And then we need to move forward with it. My biggest concern is about equity and ensuring that every resident has access to reusable shopping bags of all kinds. I know I go to the supermarket and I use many, many reusable shopping bags. And so trying to build into an ordinance requiring those who violate the ordinance, they input a lot of reusable shopping bags into underserved communities. Having EBT users require that the food stamp system pays for reusable shopping bags. And that these supermarkets, these large chain supermarkets, just share reusables with their logos and brands on them. Advertise all you want, we don't care. But I am on board with you. I am going to be bringing this to council. We are developing our sustainability plan that should be completed in September. We have a zero waste subcommittee that's working on solutions and actions to attain certain targets, the target of zero waste, looking at waste reduction. But the plastic bag ban just makes total sense. And I've been to Philadelphia. I've lived in Philadelphia my whole life. I just moved to Delaware County about a year ago. And it's not an intrusive ordinance. It's very simple to follow if you have reusable shopping bags. And I have tons of them. So I just love using them. And it's really not a difficult lift. So my goal as a Chief Sustainability Officer for Delaware County is to work with our county council members, find a supporter. I think I know who it may be, which council member, and move forward with this. And also look at other options too. What else can we do besides just this? Look at other things too. So thank you so much for this session tonight. And I really appreciate everybody sharing the model ordinances, because I definitely will be lifting from those model ordinances.
Thank you.
Erica, I will just quickly say, I see my good buddy Jim Wiley pointed out the patchwork argument. I think if you all go to the township at different levels and you say, hey, we're going to have some weird laws in this small area, why don't you just do it and do one standard law? It does make sense to have a township-wide or a county-wide, a bigger law than just small little boroughs and municipalities. So Jim's argument about patchwork is a good one.
Yeah, we have 49 municipalities in Delaware County, and if we do this as a county, then we can have all 49 municipalities participate. It just makes total sense. It's a small geographic footprint in Delaware County, but a very large population of over 500,000 residents. So we can do this if we get the county council support, and I will definitely be pursuing that. And hopefully we can come back. We have our Sustainability Commission meeting this Friday at 2 o'clock. So it's a live meeting. You can actually come to the meeting and join us. When I say live, it's a Zoom meeting, but the public can participate in the Zoom meeting. So you should totally show up and voice your concerns in the chat. Also, next week on Tuesday, County Council will be receiving a presentation from Zero Waste Associates, who is the consultant developing the county's 10-year solid waste management plan. And so I highly recommend if you would like to join that public meeting and voice your concerns also, because that's on the agenda. So you can speak up at the beginning of the county council meeting and express your desire for a plastic bag ban. And the more people who voice this, the more attractive it is to council members and elected officials.
Thank you. Okay. Oh, do you do anything? This is probably to Will. Do you do anything to promote the businesses that comply with the ordinance, or can you tell us about your sustainable storefront program?
Yeah, sure. So I guess when the second exemption hit, the COVID related one, we kind of looked around and thought, let's take a different angle here. We don't know how long this is going to be. We don't know what other tricks they have up their sleeves. So we had, even before the ordinance was even, conceived, we had businesses who are doing cool things around, reducing the impact of their business and their customers by extension. So we looked at creating a, I call it an opt-in recognition program. It's not really a cool name, but and we came up with sustainable storefronts. It was lifted almost wholesale from a program that the Surfrider Foundation does about sustainable restaurants, ocean-friendly restaurants, their program is called. And we sort of took that idea and they're kind of all over the place. There's something about like sustainable seafood and things like that. We made our own criteria that was really just focused on reducing single-use waste. So for restaurants and bars, there are 5 criteria and you have to pick 3, 2 of which are bags and straws. And then for retail, it was really just, get rid of plastic bags. And, we designed like a fun little logo. And whenever someone would sign up, we would do an announcement on our social media. We have, 11 or 12,000 local followers on our social media. And we've got to be careful not to promote the businesses, but we can thank them for participating in this program and say, XYZ just signed up and they're doing this, this, and this to reduce single-use waste in our community. And you get 1 billion likes on Facebook. And there's like, people would comment like, this is so cool. We're coming there for ice cream tonight or something like that. So you could see the public, once they knew that the business was doing this, they're more likely to support them. So, there's opportunities for good PR here. I mean, we talked about how this is like, the fee aspect makes this business friendly, but there's all this like other good PR out there. There's nothing to lose by, not giving, like switching to paper bags. But we basically created a program where people could get recognition for doing cool things, and gotten a lot of interest in replicating that in other communities, which I think is great. That website that I put up there, west-chester.com/single use, there's all this information about that program. And people have asked if they could copy it. And we said, absolutely. If you're using the same exact criteria, we prefer you stick with the name. If you want to switch up the criteria, come up with your own name. That's kind of been my canned response to that question. But, we got like 25 or 30 businesses to sign up in our little borough. I think that's really cool.
Thank you so much. Another question was, did you provide businesses with alternative options? Yeah, so like a supplier guide. I know that Philadelphia put one together. Do you have one for Westchester, or does anyone of the panelists want to add in on what was useful?
We do not. Very early on in the process, before we even had an ordinance, our mayor sent a list of products to some businesses, and she was accused of promoting products and how the politicians should not be doing that. And it was like this early lesson of like, you know, people will ding you for anything they can, anything they think is improper. So we have steered clear of doing that. We were hoping to put one together behind the scenes and then give it to our business improvement district so that they could publicize, but given their efforts to derail this ordinance, I don't see that happening. So we're hoping, we have a local green team, environmental volunteer organization. We're hoping that they can put something together, because it is important to do that and show that there are like a ton of alternatives, and especially with straws, there's like really, really cool alternatives. They're not cheap, but it goes back to like, if you only give a straw to someone who asked for it, you're going to give out 95% fewer straws, and you can afford to do like one made of sugarcane or something like that. And actually, it's an opportunity to like give your customer a truly unique experience. So yeah, getting back to the question, that we haven't put that together because sort of like like we don't want to get into that you know, promoting of individual businesses or products.
To add to that, the West Goshen, for their recent plastic bag ordinance, did provide a list on their website. And so you can definitely check that out. It should be pretty easy to replicate from Philly's list or West Goshen's list for your municipalities, just because geographically we're probably all pulling from similar vendors for bags for retailers. Though most vendors who provide plastic bags also provide other forms of bags too, like paper and reusable, especially wholesale retailers or wholesale vendors. So shouldn't be too difficult to pull a list together.
Thank you. I want to lift up Addie. I didn't touch on some of the points of her conversation with Drew from Narvik. So Addie, if you don't mind just coming off mute and sharing what else I missed.
Hey, hi. So I had a conversation with a pub owner and a store owner in Narvik, Drew. And some of the things that he talked about I thought were really interesting. He supports this whole bag ban, but he did say that Narvik implemented it in 2018, and it was very hard to find resources for some of the products that the businesses needed. As time progressed, it was easier, but then of course a pandemic set in. So Narvik is similar to media in that it is a progressive place. It's got a customer base that really wants to promote elements of healthy industry, healthy climate change, and making sure that their businesses are in a good place. So part of what Drew said to me was that finding product became very difficult for a while, became easier. Margins were tough because the product inventory was more expensive. But as fuel changed, it was less expensive. But now there is also, you know, an element of the pandemic. So it's kind of an upscale, downscale type of thing for businesses and retail. And that's something that I think that he said has to be taken into consideration. He feels that Narvik moving forward with the ban is very positive, but it's also something that has, because the people support it. Most of the businesses and other industries support it, but it's something that has to be implemented now, that we are looking at, most of us are looking at a ban to think significantly about when do we implement this. And that was his words, you know, those were his words. So we want to be environmentally conscious. We live in environments or communities where people want to be environmentally conscious. We want to have our restaurants and our businesses be environmentally conscious, but we also want to make sure that their margins are not cut so short. So to have ordinances in place is really important. To make those ordinances robust, but to think about when to implement them is really important. So that was kind of his advice to me. So that's what I'm going to share.
Thank you. And
yeah,
I forgot to introduce you that you are a member of the media at EAC as well.
I am.
I think that's a good point as far as enforcement in that time frame. That's a question I have. Perhaps our panelists. I know we're kind of running down to the end of this meeting, but I think that is a question that some other people have mentioned that might be useful to weigh in on.
I'll just quickly say, and Will mentioned this, and Addie just referenced it. The supply of paper bags right now is extremely tight, not only from other reasons, you know, COVID-related reasons, but a lot of municipalities around the country and the world are banning plastic and moving towards paper. New York City and New York State vendors, stores are having an extremely difficult time complying with the New York law because they just can't get paper bags. My friend did the plastic bag law up in New York, and she's saying that almost no one's able to comply because they just can't get the bags. So that's another important, I know I'm hitting the fee a lot, but if you don't put the fee in, then customers are just going to expect that free bag, and you're just going to put a tremendous amount of pressure on the stores to come up with paper bags or get fined. You're putting the store in a really difficult spot. Paper bags are very hard to get right now, and the prices are just going to go up. It's about 10 cents a bag. I could see it going up to 12 or 15 cents a bag as this continues, as the trend continues banning plastic.
And Logan, if I can push back a little bit, one of the things that Drew said was that even though there's, you know, this fee, a lot of places, a lot of businesses just say, forget it. I'm not doing this. It kind of, you know, I don't know how to do, you know, it's not in my POS system. It's also just something that's going to make my costs go up a little bit more, where it's not worthwhile and it's not enforceable. And that's because of our small boroughs. So for some place like Narvik or Media, how do you enforce it, you know? So that's just something that he threw out there in our conversation.
I don't know. Farron, did you want to jump in on it?
Yeah, I mean, I can just one thing about businesses complying and having the right infrastructure to do this. We've seen plastic bag ordinances with fees in hundreds of places, literally hundreds all across the country. There are statewide bans in I think 8 or 9 states now. So tons of businesses have had to deal with these ordinances, and they've found ways of making it work. They've found ways of complying with them and dealing with them. So certainly it takes an adjustment period. That's why most ordinances should have time between when it's passed and when it goes into effect. You don't want it to be too long like Philadelphia's, because then it causes extra confusion. But it takes time to adjust. However, retailers can adjust. they can make these changes, they can get on board. And enforcement, you can certainly get creative. Like there's citizen reporting forums that Philadelphia has, West Goshen created one. A lot of municipalities have their own citizen reporting stuff for potholes, for downed power lines, for other various issues, and you can just wrap bags into that. All businesses already have code enforcement, so health inspections or other code inspections. You can wrap plastic bags into those inspections. That's what Pittsburgh is planning to do. So there are a lot of different tacks you can take, things you can add on and push them together. But certainly it's something that you have to figure out sort of while you're doing it, just because if you don't introduce an ordinance, if you don't get that vote scheduled, get that vote passed, then it's probably going to take too long and you won't end up having the authority to do it in the future. And so it'll all be a moot point anyway. So again, making sure there is time to adjust, but not taking too long, and actually moving forward on these things, because retailers will be able to make these changes and get used to the new policies.
I guess I like the honor system rather than the telling system. Anyway, my take.
Logan, did you want to add in on that, or?
Yeah, we have heard also that some stores are going to have a difficult time on their POS, the system at checkout. Farron said it. You know, there will be a time period of hard change for some businesses, but there's better systems already coming online that have all these in there. Really, all it is just adding an item to their POS. You know, it's not. I don't think that it's that hard. I've got a friend that sells POS systems to businesses, and it's just adding a new number. And Will probably knows this better than us, so I'll let Will answer. But I will say quickly, even if you can't enforce it that well, it's still good to have it on the books. And, you know, shame and people want to comply with as many laws. Most people want to comply with the laws. So if it's on the books, you know, they're probably going to do as good a job as they can on complying. But yeah, Will might have a better answer.
I'm not sure I have much more to add. I think, you know, agree with what everyone said. I think if there's no enforcement mechanism, it's not going to happen. I mean, you're going to have, and this is why, so originally I was thinking we're going to be really hands-off enforcing this, but then it occurred to me the absolute worst outcome here could be we roll this out and we have like half of the businesses comply. And then they look around a month later and say, wait a second, no one else is doing it. My competitor across the street isn't doing it. The hell with this. I'm not doing it now. And all of a sudden you're at zero. Like, that's just a race to the bottom. And, you know, I mentioned like without the fee, it's sort of, you're just like virtue signaling against plastic. Like without enforcement, it's kind of virtue signaling too. We can pat ourselves on the back and it looks nice in a report at the end of the year. But, you know, if we really want to do something about this, like it's got to have teeth. It's got to force change. I disagree. It's a big change. It's a small change. It's, you know, the POS thing, we've heard that before. You put a barcode on the counter, you scan it every time you hand out a bag. Like it's that simple. So, you know, but I guess the point, like people are going to find anything and everything they can to push back. And that's why you got to have a good policy. You got to think it through. You got to have, you know, commitment from your elected people. You got to educate your new elected people. And, you know, ultimately it comes down to them having, you know, what's, and I've become very cynical even about local politics, but like these people want to do the right thing for their community, or is this like their first step in like going on to a higher office, in which case it's just a popularity contest. Like you got to have committed elected officials as well. If you have all of those things, the rest kind of fall into place.
One thing to add on though, you're never going to please everyone. You might not get all your commissioners or supervisors ahead of a vote to commit to voting for it. And you may end up with unanimous passage because of pressure and momentum, but it's very difficult to get everyone on board ahead of time. You're never going to have every retailer give you a vote of confidence ahead of time. Most might stay silent or might not get in the fight, but they probably won't pose roadblocks either. And you're not going to have every resident. I don't think there's ever been a law or policy that every resident of a municipality has unanimously supported. I could be wrong about that, but there are always going to be people who are against something, and they're always the most vocal. So you just have to accept that you're going to have some opposition. Not everyone will be on board, but from all the surveys I've seen in Pennsylvania and across the country, people support these policies. Retailers, the majority of them support these policies, and they're popular. So you can take heart in that this isn't something that people hate.
Thank you. I think that's a very strong point. Well, I appreciate everyone that's been on our panel. I just quickly want to leave like just 5 minutes for municipalities, a representative from the different municipalities are on. If anyone wants to come off mute and quickly give a brief update on where you are with your bag ban. I know that's
Erica, there's a button at the bottom of everyone's screen that says reactions. If you go there and you can raise your hand, that will bring you right to the top, and we'll be able to ask you to unmute, and then you can share your thoughts. That way we'll be able to do it in a more organized way.
okay.
If anyone needs help finding it, or you can just shoot a message out there that you want to update us. Alternatively, I know that Peter, thank you for sharing the link to the Haverford meeting from last night. You know, they're clearly ahead of us and some other municipalities, but it would just be good to get a sense of where others in our area are. I mean, obviously we're starting the process. We in media, you know, I'm a new member of council. My question actually is, some of the issues we may face may come from members of council who aren't so new, you know, that are more established with businesses in the community, et cetera. And that may be an issue in other municipalities too. How much of it, Will, was political pushback versus legitimate concern? You know, that's one question I would have, but I can get that answered separately. Is there anyone that would like to share where you stand currently with your efforts to ban bags or straws or other plastics? Okay, I don't see anybody raising.
Peter shared his update in the chat. Thank you, Peter.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you. Will's hanging off. Well, thank you. If anyone needs to head off now, we'll stay on for a few extra minutes. But
sure. And if you're interested in staying in touch, please put your contact information in the chat, because again we'll save it. And I think the committee with the EAC, Erica and Karen and Adeline, thank you again for all of your legwork on this.
And I just want to thank Drew Johnson for his feedback from Narvik and the information that he posed, because it was very well balanced and really supportive, but also gave us an insight into how the pandemic affected and how just, you know, life goes on when we kind of deal with businesses and restaurants and everything else. So I really appreciate Drew's feedback.
Thank you, and thank you for reaching out to him. That was great. Yeah. Appreciate it.
If I could share something real quick just before people hop off, but as you move forward in this process, definitely use Penn Environment, use Clean Air Council, use environmental groups as a resource. We have policy resources to help you craft ordinances, but we also have thousands of members across the state. We can mobilize people for hearings. We can get people to put calls into councils to build support. We can help get coverage in local media. So as you're moving forward on this, definitely reach out and use us as a resource. I put my email and phone number in the chat, so definitely get in contact.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I guess on behalf of our Media Bureau Environmental Advisory Council and you know, our committees, thank you all for tuning in tonight. It was quite informational. This recording will be available. I think it will be distributed. We hope there may be more forums coming up down the road. But thank you so much for your time, and we appreciate it. we'll be online, and if anybody would like to chat about anything for a little while longer.
Yeah, I'll say if that anybody I missed question, because I know there were some that were redundant and some that were already answered by the time you got to them. But if you do want to come off mute, use that feature Mark mentioned. And
Margaret and Peter have had their hands up. I'd like to hear what they have to say.
Oh, sorry. I'm not good at this. Ask to unmute.
Just muted. Margaret is muted.
Yeah, this is Peter. Can you hear me?
Go with Peter first. Yes.
Yeah, so I had a question regarding Westchester. It didn't occur to me until we started getting really deep into the weeds on the ordinance, you know, this sort of the full range of stores that this was applying to. So I'm kind of curious about like the Lowe's and Home Depots, how they've responded in Westchester, how any of the department stores have responded. I read an article recently about New Jersey's law, and the department stores seem to be unfazed by it, saying, well, we're just going to move back to paper completely. So I'm just curious, what's the profile like there in Westchester? How are they pushing reusables, or are they just gone to paper, or what's happening with them?
I think that Will is commuting home, so I'm not sure. I see he's still on, but I'm not sure if he's available to answer that question.
Logan or Farhan?
Wiley raising his hand. Jim, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, so Peter, there are no Lowe's, no department stores in Westchester Borough. It's just a college town with a bunch of bars.
Okay.
We do have a grocery store, Carlino's, which is a higher end grocery store, and they haven't given out plastic in quite a while, and they jumped at the chance to post a sign out their checkout place that says, you know, the borough is making us charge 10 cents per paper bag. So that's fine. The borough's the bad guys, and life goes on.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, Margaret. Oh, whoops.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so in Radnor, I'm the chair of the Radnor EAC. We just redrafted our plastic ordinance from before the ban on the bans. And I sent it just to our township manager and a few of our board of commissioners. And the president of the board wants us to tell all the businesses about it first. But the thing is, our EAC, we have no contacts, no way of directly contacting these businesses. We have no budget or anything like that. How do you go? Are we supposed to actually, the EAC members walk door to door to each of the businesses? And there are like, way over 100 businesses in Radnor, to inform them, or how do we go about doing this? We're not allowed to have a Facebook page. And so it's, you know, they're saying inform the businesses before you propose this to the board, but I don't know how to go about doing this.
Well, it's kind of their job, not your job to do that. I mean, the businesses will know when they put it on the agenda, and will probably come out in numbers complaining about it. I mean, you could do a survey, but if you do a survey, I would also allow every resident to respond to the survey, because I think there's going to be naturally more opposition in the business community. And as one of the speakers said, you only hear the negative feedback, you know, so the big retailers who have already adapted to this in other jurisdictions, they're not going to complain about it. It's only going to be people who are worried about having to do it that have never done it before. And, you know, so you're going to get, I mean, it's a bit of a conundrum for you. I mean,
yeah, throw it back in our lap, you know.
Well, our EAC has done web-based web-based surveys if you have a good community outreach vehicle to even get people to respond to the surveys. I mean, if the commissioners send out newsletters, for example, you can set up a web-based survey and ask them to publicize it, you know, put it back on them to publish. You're correct. You don't have a mechanism to reach the entire community.
So Margaret, I have a question for you. This is Addie. So there's not a business authority, is my understanding. I know you've got a very strong library, and the library has been a cornerstone of a gathering place for many organizations and industries and businesses. And I would actually work with whoever is your EAC liaison, if you have one, and the library director to do a call of action, to bring people together, to bring businesses together, to get a forum going there. I just know that that's been successful in other libraries and other communities. So
that's a great idea. Thank you.
Yeah, that's my suggestion to you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Never would have thought of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was actually a question at our commissioner's work session last night. Did you do a survey of the business community? And so, by the way, in Haverford, it was sort of easier because we had a commissioner ask EAC to develop an ordinance. So it wasn't even our idea, right? So we blame it on that commissioner. But his position is, hey, we're elected officials. It's our job to decide these things. We don't need a survey, which is kind of interesting, right? Yeah. Others are like, well, you know, so our response when we were asked the question is, well, no, we didn't do one, but other communities have. And the responses have been, you know, pointed to like Narvik, and, you know, the responses are very favorable in the community, and you could expect them to be less favorable in the business community. So just reaching out to the business community is sort of a trap. I would be careful about doing that. I think if you do a survey, you know, maybe you could ask, are you a local business as part of the response, and have the whole community respond. I definitely would not just have the business community respond unless you really have a strong business group, which I don't think there is one in all of that covers all the businesses in Radnor. Radnor is a big township.
Yeah, we have a Wayne Business Association, but they absolutely do not answer me. I email and call, and they never respond. Yeah. So, and that doesn't cover all of the businesses, but
my suggestion is craft a survey, give it back to the township and say, you wanted a survey, here, publicize it.
Thanks.
I'll just quickly say, in Philly, over the years, we did a lot of business outreach, and honestly, the businesses weren't that against it. It's just if they needed to say something publicly, they were going to come out against it. But when we spoke with them, they're like, we don't really care. We'd like a standard, easy to enforce. We'd like a standard, easy to understand and enforceable law. But the businesses are so hesitant to come out against it because they don't want to be the named participants in supporting a law that is going to alienate customers. They feel this was what we heard over and over is, we don't want to be the face of this. We're fine with it, you know, but I think you're going to hear mostly negative stuff if you're asking businesses to give their input, because that's just what they think customers want. So that's what we saw in Philly.
Thank you, Logan. There's another hand up, Gary. You can unmute. You have to unmute yourself.
Can I be heard?
Yes, thank you.
I am with the Easttown Environmental Advisory Council. We are all of 1 year old. We are Chester County invaders to your Delaware County chat room. We are about to drop a draft plastic bags ordinance with our Board of Supervisors. Before doing that, we have conducted a survey of local businesses. And we did that by a combination of direct contact and also working through the local business association. And got a pretty good participation, and really did not get a whole lot of opposition to the idea. Now that will of course be a different thing from actually doing this, but at least hypothetically in advance, we did not run into significant opposition.
Thank you very much, Gary. And I think on that note, we're going to wrap things up. I know we have, we've been together now a good hour and a half, and I thank everyone again for your time. I want to especially again thank Farron and Logan and Will, as well as Erica, Adeline, and Karen for your help tonight in putting all this together. This was very informative. And I look forward to seeing many of you throughout the rest of our journey in getting the planet back, I think would probably be the nicest way to say it. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.